Revealed. Millionaire makes an amazing decision for his housekeeper that will transform her life. John Caldwell stared out at the pristine evening sky, its fading light casting an ethereal glow over the sprawling mansion he called home. At 42, he was the epitome of success in Willow Creek, the self-made millionaire whose tech startup had taken the world by storm. Yet, nestled within the extravagant walls of luxury, a gnawing loneliness nestled deep in his chest. The laughter of friends and colleagues had faded into a hollow echo, leaving silence that filled every corner of his solitude. The hum of his luxury car, sitting idle in the driveway, felt more like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong than symbols of his accomplishments. Maria Hernandez, his housekeeper of over a decade, was an unwavering force in his life. Every morning he marveled at her resilience as she juggled the responsibilities of motherhood with her unyielding dedication to maintaining his home. It was her loyalty, however, that often confronted him in his quiet moments. Every whispered worry about her son, Miguel, brilliant yet trapped in their financial reality, felt like a weight on his conscience. Each night, she tucked Miguel into bed, the light from his desk lamp reflecting the hope in his eyes as he pored over his college books. It was crushing, knowing he could ease that burden, but fearing the ramifications it might bring. As market shifts battered the foundation of his company, John's anxiety spiraled. Employees faced layoffs, and conversations around the water cooler turned to panic. He fought against the tide, pressured to make decisions that affected lives. But amidst the turmoil, the anguish of Maria's silent sacrifices crept into his consciousness. The stark contrast between their worlds gnawed at him. Could he truly claim success while watching Miguel's dreams slip further away? The thought of offering a lifeline twisted in his gut. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. One evening at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension, he suggested an audacious idea. A scholarship fund dedicated to underprivileged students like Miguel. The moment hung between them, filled with disbelief. As Maria's eyes widened in shock and gratitude, his heart raced with the implications. Could this be his redemption, or would it brand him a villain in the eyes of the town? The looming shadows of judgment from friends and colleagues began to envelop him. Doubt gnawed, and whispers of selfishness echoed in his ears. In an instant, the decision felt monumental, burdened with implications he hadn't fully reckoned with. As murmurs of dissent surfaced, a growing pressure surrounded him, making it hard to breathe. What if it changed everything? Their lives, his business. The emotional weight became suffocating as he stood before a community ready to question not only his motives, but the very roots of the path he had chosen. The stakes grew higher with every passing moment, leaving John to wonder. Could he quietly change the course for Maria and Miguel, without crumbling under the expectations of a life built on privilege? Just as he began to gather the courage to speak out publicly, the doors swung open. Miguel stepped inside, clenching a letter tightly in his hand, filled with possibilities, yet haunted by uncertainty. The room thickened with tension as all eyes turned toward the young man bursting with a mix of hope and trepidation. What revelation would unravel now? The answer could reshape everything, leaving John in turmoil as every thought collided, and the crowd leaned in, breathless and waiting. Miguel's face was a tumult of emotions as he held the letter like a fragile thing, both a ticket to opportunity and a burden of expectation. John could see the way anxiety flickered in his eyes, the weight of hesitance dancing at the edges of his expression, poised to spill over into the room. It was a moment suspended in time, where uncertainty reigned. With deliberate slowness, Miguel unfolded the paper, his fingers trembling just slightly against the crisp edges. John felt an urgency twist in his gut. Whatever news was about to emerge from that letter could reshape not just Miguel's fate, but John's own moral framework. As he stood across the table from Maria, her breath hitched in anticipation. It was clear that both their worlds hovered heavily on this singular moment. "Miguel, take your time," John encouraged, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his own mounting tension. "We're here to support you, no matter what." Swallowing hard, Miguel finally took a deep breath, his voice steadying. "It's from the university," he began. "The one I applied to for the scholarship." He paused, scanning the reactions around him. The unfurling silence screamed louder than any words could convey. John's heart thundered against his ribcage. Had he done enough? Would it even matter? The connection between his decision about the scholarship fund and the weight of Miguel's future began to solidify into real urgency, the kind that was far more pressing than any business meeting or quarterly report could bring. Then Miguel continued, "I was accepted. I have a chance to go. This is a full scholarship." The words fell into the room, heavy but electric, sending ripples through each person present. Maria's eyes glistened with tears of joy, her hands trembling with an uncontainable blend of pride and relief. Yet, as the realization settled over John, that Miguel's acceptance was a reflection not just of his past aspirations, but of the widespread inequities Maria faced, doubt crept in again. John felt exposed. Part of him wanted to retreat into the comforts of his financial success, an elaborate lifestyle. But here, in the experiences of Miguel, he found himself staring directly at the consequences of his earlier inaction. Had he merely created an illusion of aid through the scholarship fund? Would Maria and Miguel's lives truly change, or would he remain a benefactor trapped within the glass walls of his mansion? "Congratulations, Miguel," Maria finally whispered, her voice breaking the tension. "You've earned this. You're going to bring so much pride to our family." For Miguel, the victory felt surreal. His hard work had finally borne fruit, yet the dread of leaving home loomed large. The thought of the unknown snaked its way into his joy, entwining with the pride in his mother's voice and the fearful thoughts of uncertainty in his own heart. As the euphoria of Miguel's news settled into contemplation, John's mind raced. What did this scholarship mean for his future decisions? Did it shift the dynamics of how he viewed success? Struggling internally, he weighed the implications of the choices he'd made for Maria and Miguel against the shaky ground his own career stood upon. Could he labor to support their journey while grappling with the challenges of his company? As the night wore on, John realized the moment was no longer just Miguel's. It was a turning point for him as well. This was the crucible through which he could either solidify his resolve to change or allow the tide of his own anxieties to pull him back into uncertainty. Inside, a fire ignited. The time had come to face what he truly stood for, how he would redefine success in practical terms, not just for himself, but for those closest to him. With this clarity blossoming in his mind, John moved closer to the kitchen table. He looked to Maria, then back to Miguel. He could be a catalyst for change. As he opened his mouth to speak, a heavy knock sounded at the door. What would that knock bring? Would it be a continuation of hope, or another layer of conflict unraveling before him? The air crackled with expectation as they all turned toward the door, hearts racing in unison. The heavy knock echoed through the room, punctuating the hush that had enveloped them. John's heart raced, a jumble of curiosity and dread flooding his senses. He shot a glance at Maria and Miguel, trying to gauge their reaction. Maria's brow knitted with concern, while Miguel's determination seemed to falter for a fleeting second. They were all aware that the night had already shifted irreversibly. Whatever this summoning at the door meant could easily tilt the delicate balance of dreams and fears they had just begun to navigate. John hesitated, his hand hanging above the doorknob. An impulse to avoid confrontation pulled at him, but he pushed it down. This was a moment demanding responsibility, alignment with his newfound convictions, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. The door held unknowns. challenges they would need to face together. And for the first time in what felt like ages, John was eager to meet whatever lay on the other side. With a deep breath, John turned the knob and opened the door. Standing there was David, a longtime associate from his firm, wearing an expression that hinted at urgency. The sight of him sparked an anxiety within John. Business matters could no longer sit idly by while promising opportunities unfolded in his personal life. "David, what brings you here?" John asked, masking his growing unease with the politically correct semblance of cordiality. "John, we need to talk." "It's about the scholarship fund," he blurted, eyes darting toward Maria and Miguel as if gauging their presence. The gravity in David's voice tightened the air around them. John felt the palpable connection between his own aspirations and the realities of others collapsing in on itself. His stomach knotted at the reminder of the precarious path he had chosen, and he couldn't shake the thought that this might divert him from his commitment to support Maria and Miguel. "Can it wait?" John felt a desperation rising, compelled by the urge to protect the tenuous joy of this night. David shook his head, seriousness deepening his features. "No, John. The situation is critical. We received reports of potential misuse of funds in our scholarship program. I believe you need to take immediate action. There may be ramifications that could affect all of us." Maria's eyes widened, a mix of confusion and fear creeping into her expression. Miguel's face hardened as he realized that the promises made could now be under threat. The crushing weight of responsibility loomed larger than ever, pressing against John's chest and forcing him into clarity. "David, this is not the time. Miguel just received news of his acceptance. He deserves to celebrate, not confront our failures." John's voice was tinged with frustration. It felt deeply unjust to interrupt what so scarcely resembled a victory. But it's exactly at times like these that we can't lose focus. Choices made in haste can have devastating consequences. David's eyes glinted with urgency. "You need to make a decision, and fast." The conflicting demands of loyalty and obligation collided within John. He glanced back at Miguel, who was processing the uproar with a maturity that startled him. Could a moment of triumph unravel so quickly? Uncertainty gripped him tightly. He had made a pledge to make changes, yet another facet of his life clamored for attention. His mind raced. Could he confront this head-on, risking completion of Miguel's journey? Or did he have the courage to embrace this challenge as he had promised, reshaping his own narrative in the face of professional and personal dilemmas? John squared his shoulders, feeling a swell of determination rise within him. It was time to embrace a different kind of leadership and redefine what success meant. Not just for him, but for those who depended on him. "I'll handle this," John declared, looking directly into David's eyes. "But we'll do it together, and on my own terms." As he closed the door, he knew that this commitment to transparency and integrity might just forge new paths, not only for Miguel and Maria, but also for himself. The shift within was palpable. He had chosen courage over retreat, and in that choice lived a potential he had yet to realize. But as he turned back to face the others, a distant voice in his mind whispered that this was only the beginning. Challenges loomed on the horizon, risking everything they had just begun to build. What would come next? How would he wrestle with the looming consequences? The tension ignited a flickering in John's soul, and with it, an insatiable yearning to face whatever would flow from this night forward. John walked away from the door, feeling the weight of his decision press heavily on his shoulders. David's urgency lingered in the air, pulling at the edges of his resolve. He turned back to face Maria and Miguel, who watched him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Their eyes, filled with unspoken questions, mirrored his own internal unrest. "What did David want?" Maria asked softly, breaking the silence that had gripped the room. "It's about the scholarship fund. There are issues we need to address," John replied reluctantly, choosing his words carefully. He could feel his heart racing again, the tension rising like a pressure cooker. Miguel looked between them with growing apprehension. Is it serious? Are we at risk of losing the scholarship? John couldn't meet his gaze. The thought of Miguel's dreams being thwarted pricked at the fabric of his convictions. I don't know yet, but we can't let this overshadow what you've just achieved. You've earned this moment, Miguel. With resolve anchoring him, John took a deep breath, considering how to approach the chaos that loomed ahead. This was not only about Miguel's future. It was about setting an example, about creating a ripple effect of integrity that resonated beyond his own aspirations. His ambition had to intertwine with responsibility. As he paced the room, John contemplated strategies to protect the scholarship while ensuring transparency. The mismanagement of funds, however, wasn't just about saving a program. It was about rebuilding trust, and that would require confronting the truth. But was he prepared for the fallout? I need to look into this right now. It's time to get to the bottom of it, John announced, his mind racing with potential courses of action. Outlining a plan began to crystallize into something tangible, something he could control. Maria's brow furrowed as she processed John's decision. But what about Miguel's celebration? Shouldn't we take a moment to enjoy this victory? Her voice was a reminder of the delicate balance he had to maintain. He could see the excitement in Miguel's eyes turning to uncertainty. John felt a pang of guilt, but quickly quelled it, realizing that true victory might involve deeper sacrifice. This is part of the journey, Maria. We can celebrate after we ensure that Miguel's future remains secure, John said, hoping his tone conveyed the urgency of the situation. Okay, Maria said slowly, her voice thin. But I'll be here to support you both, no matter what. A small sense of relief washed over John. He was not navigating this alone. The need for unity and support became clearer. Establishing a framework for transparency within the scholarship program would instill confidence not just for Miguel, but for everyone involved. A vision of accountability began to form, promising a greater purpose. As he dove into his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard, he thrived in the chaos. John researched the scholarship's financials, meticulously mapping out discrepancies and potential areas of concern. Each piece of data reaffirmed his idea that challenges, while daunting, can lead to enlightenment. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and by the time John leaned back and rubbed his eyes, the glow of the screen illuminated a newfound clarity. This was no longer just a problem. It was an opportunity to advocate for change and foster growth. He felt empowered, the flicker of potential ignited within him. Okay, I have a plan, he said, raising his voice to regain their attention. We'll address the issue head-on, secure the funds, and speak with those responsible. It's time to be honest about what's happening. Miguel nodded, revitalized by John's determination. And after that, we can celebrate? Definitely, John promised, excitement gleaming in his eyes. We'll turn this around and have a lot to celebrate together. Yet, as he witnessed the glimmer return to Miguel's hopeful gaze, an undercurrent of apprehension settled in the pit of John's stomach. Ahead lay not just challenges, but the possibility of consequences that could turn their lives upside down. As he glanced out the window, a storm began to brew on the horizon, seemingly echoing the tumult within him. John wondered what kind of storm lay ahead. Would he be swept away, or could he harness it to create something transformative? The moment of truth was drawing near, and he sensed that the real test of his resolve was yet to come. Would he be able to rise to the occasion and protect those he cared for? The path was treacherous, and John was just beginning to understand what he was truly capable of in the face of adversity. Would his newfound commitment to integrity withstand the treachery that might confront him? John's resolve solidified into action as he reviewed the financial details of the scholarship fund. Data sprawled across the screen, revealing troubling inconsistencies. The discrepancies weren't simply numbers. They were revelations about mismanagement, negligence that could unravel everything they had fought for. As he sat in the dim light of his apartment, thoughts raced through his mind like thunderclouds, each one clamoring for attention. He saw a future not just for Miguel, but for countless students who depended on this scholarship to pave their paths. A A slip of paper became a weighty contract with destiny. If he faltered now, all their dreams would hang in the balance. John's fingers flew over the keyboard as he began to draft his approach. He contemplated inviting David for a face-to-face discussion. Confrontation was necessary, but so was strategy. Is confrontation really the best way? A voice in his head nagged. He had often chosen diplomacy over conflict in the past, but sometimes honesty demanded a harsher approach. The duality churned within him, wrestling for dominance. What he had always done versus what was now essential. He sighed, the stress palpable within him. Miguel and Maria lingered nearby, their hushed voices barely audible. He turned toward them, observing their hopeful expressions. It ignited a fire within him. John felt a sense of responsibility that transcended personal ambition. He was not merely an advocate. He was a guardian of aspirations. "Let's do this together," John called out, gaining confidence in his own voice. "I need both of you to stand by me when I confront David." They exchanged glances, uncertainty painting their faces. This was not just about action. It was about standing firm against the tide of potential fallout. Maria nodded slowly, though her apprehension remained. "What if he denies everything? What if he turns it on us?" she asked. It was a valid concern. John understood the risks, but the stakes were too high to play it safe. The truth must be voiced, not swept under the rug. "I can't bury the truth," John replied, feeling the weight of his own words. "We owe it to each other, and to every student this fund supports." The essence of integrity took root, pushing him toward a point of no return. As they gathered their thoughts, John recognized the turning point he was facing. He was no longer a mere participant in the system. He was redefining it. The revelation dawned upon him. He had within him the capacity for change, not just for himself, but as a beacon for others. With newfound determination, he set a date for the meeting with David. Fear mingled with anticipation. Every ounce of doubt whispered that this could end badly, yet John found a stubborn ember of hope flickering inside him. The time had come to face what was needed, he thought grimly. Before he could think twice, John reached for his phone, dialing David's number with purpose. As the ringing tone punctuated the stillness of the room, his heart hammered against his chest. Each ring felt like an echo of his own apprehension and resolve, a countdown to the confrontation. As the line connected and David answered, John felt a surge of adrenaline. "David, I think we need to meet regarding the scholarship fund," he initiated, his voice firm despite the storm of emotions roiling inside him. The conversation that followed would shape not just the course of the scholarship, but his very identity as a leader and advocate. With each passing moment, John understood that this step brought him closer to revealing who he truly was, not just in the realm of scholarships and funds, but as a person committed to integrity and accountability. Just as he began to lay out his concerns, a sudden thought struck him, a realization of how this confrontation not only challenged the status quo, but also stood to unleash previously untapped strength within himself. A shifting tide of empowerment consumed his doubts, offering a glimpse of the man he was becoming. Would he emerge intact, or would the consequences be too profound? As he hung up, a sense of elevation replaced his anxiety. The path ahead was winding and fraught with uncertainty, but one truth emerged clear. He was ready to embrace whatever came next. What he didn't realize was that the upcoming meeting would not just test his courage, but also reveal layers of ambition he had kept buried. What awaited him could change everything he thought he knew about himself. The next day unfolded with a peculiar blend of anticipation and dread. John awoke before dawn, the weight of the upcoming meeting hanging heavily in the air. Thoughts tumbled through his mind like a chaotic symphony, underscoring his resolve with a heightened sense of purpose. He had prepared his points meticulously, yet the shadow of self-doubt whispered unrelenting fears into his ears. Was he truly equipped to confront someone like David, who wore his authority like armor? He chose to start his day with some clarity, brewing a cup of strong coffee while pacing the small confines of his kitchen. The aroma filled the silence, acting as a comforting reminder of the simple joys in life even amidst turmoil. As he took the first sip, he recalled every instance in his life that led him to this pivotal moment: the scholarships he fought for, the conversations that ignited hope, and the students like Miguel relying on him. Those reflections crystallized his intent, reinforcing the decision to confront David head-on. With hours passing swiftly, John arrived at the office, the very place where the scholarship fund's fate had spiraled into jeopardy. Each step echoed in the hollow spaces of his mind as he navigated through the stark corporate landscape, dotted with glass walls and faceless administrative duties. He spotted David's office at the end of the hall, a bastion of power insulated from the realities that lurked outside. The meeting was set for late morning, and as the clock ticked closer, John could feel the electric tension coiling in his stomach. He knew he needed to ground himself, to channel the fires that fueled his certainty. Finding refuge in a small plant-filled break room, he leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths, sifting through both the fear and determination that waged war within him. There was no room for cowardice. He had to step into the arena, unfiltered and raw. During his moment of solitude, a few colleagues passed by, exchanging smiles that felt both genuine and oblivious to the internal struggles he faced. He realized then the duality of his existence. Part of him remained an ordinary employee, bound by routines, yet another part was on the brink of something fundamentally transformative. This meeting would set a course not just for the scholarship fund, but for who he meant to become in the face of discord. When he finally approached David's office, time seemed to ambulate. With one final inhalation, he knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. David looked up from his desk, the flicker of surprise crossing his face quickly replaced by a veneer of control. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a collision of ideologies. "John, good to see you," David said, his tone practiced and inviting but with an undercurrent of skepticism. The atmosphere shifted as the door closed behind John, a silence descending that carried mutinous potential. "Thanks for agreeing to meet with me," John replied, his voice steadier than he felt. As he dove into the conversation, laying out his concerns with precision and clarity, he could sense the immediate shift in the room. Each statistic he presented, every claim he rebutted, seemed to stitch a new narrative, one where integrity battled against indifference. But as John countered question after question from David, he was confronted by a chilling moment. David's facade began to crack. His bemusement shifted to defensiveness. "You can't expect me to believe these numbers without proof, John. You know how competitive this world is," he retorted, his tone now a blend of irritation and condescension. The conflict ignited a wildfire deep within John. It wasn't just about the scholarship. It was an indictment of everything he had grown to oppose. In that moment, he found a clarity that outweighed the fear. This fight wasn't merely about numbers. It was about moral conviction, standing firm for those who had no voice. As he pressed onward through David's rebuttals, a spark of defiance surged within him. Could he truly hold his ground? Just as he was about to lay out the final pieces of evidence that might sway David, an unexpected edge to David's posture caught his attention. The intensity in the air shifted yet again as David's eyes darkened, veering into personal territory. "You think this is about the money, John? There are bigger forces at play than you can fathom," he concluded ominously. In those final words, something clicked inside John, igniting a decision that would change the trajectory of his fight. Bigger forces. Maybe it's time I find out what they are, he thought, feeling the real battle was only just beginning. With everything hanging in the balance, John knew he was teetering on the brink of uncovering deeper truths. Not just about David, but also about the system that sought to sideline his ambition. What dangerous revelations lay ahead would reshape everything he thought he could endure. The breathless aftermath of the meeting left John shaking, the echo of David's ominous words still reverberating in his mind. He stepped out of the office, navigating the maze of glass and steel that spanned the corporation. Now more than ever, the sterile environment felt suffocating. Each cubicle a reminder of the indifference that permeated the system. He was a warrior suddenly standing in a battlefield, armed only with principles that seemed increasingly fragile against the weight of corporate schematics. His fingers grazed the cool surface of the conference room door as he passed, and time slowed to a crawl. Questions spiraled. How deep did the corruption run? What did David mean by bigger forces? Fragments of doubt intertwined with steely resolve. John was more committed now. He needed to expose what lay beneath the corporate veneer. The remainder of the day passed in a blur. As hours crawled by, the adrenaline-fueled clarity he had felt during the confrontation began to fade, replaced by an all-consuming internal dialogue, battling insecurities and potential paths. He retreated to his desk, the chaotic remnants of his thoughts spilling over onto blank pages. Each stroke of the pen was both liberating and confining. Ideas sprang forth, but they came with the risk of making all too real the stakes involved. "Focus, John," he muttered to himself, a silent mantra to drown out the rising tide of self-doubt. For the first time in a long while, he contemplated seeking allies, finding others who shared his vision for a just scholarship fund. But would they even take him seriously after today's encounter? That night, he began to research, piecing together a web of information that could strengthen his case. A series of articles about institutional misconduct fluttered across his screen, memories of students who fell victim to the impersonal cruelty of the system igniting his passion. It was not merely about money. It was about accountability, about transforming a system that profited from the disenfranchised. The stakes reached beyond him. It was personal. With every fact he uncovered, John stumbled upon whispers of clandestine deals and cronyism within the organization. The deeper he delved, the more expansive the picture became. Every revelation seemed to press against the walls of his ambition, urging him to make his move, to confront those who exploited their power. Days blurred into nights, strategy overshadowing fatigue. Then, one evening, as the glow of his desk lamp reflected off the papers strewn around him, John received an unexpected email. It was a simple message from Miguel, one of his former scholarship recipients. It read, "I believe in you. Thank you for fighting." Those few words pierced through the fog of uncertainty. John felt a surge of purpose, a knot of loyalty anchoring him to something larger than himself. Maybe this is just the evidence I need, he thought, propelling his resolve. He decided that sharing his findings with colleagues could mobilize support. Together, they could create a movement that emphasized transparency and compassion, reshaping the organization from within. Yet, as he hit send to share his findings with a trusted few, a nagging apprehension settled in. He knew that by reaching out, he was drawing the battle lines. What if it backfired? Could a united front fortify his stance, or would it expose him and his allies to retaliation? The weight of his choices pressed upon him, but the voices of those he fought for echoed resoundingly. The fire behind his decisions had transformed from a mere flicker to a blazing resolve. The impending fight was not merely an assertion of his career. It was a confrontation with the moral decay he had encountered in the halls of corporate power. In that moment, John understood. This was merely the prelude to a much larger conflict. The ground would soon shake beneath them, and the quest for justice would demand everything he had. All he needed now were allies willing to step into the light. Would they rise to the challenge, or would John stand alone against the brewing storm? The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting sharp shadows across his cluttered desk. John struggled to shake off the remnants of sleep, his stiff muscles a testament to the long hours he'd sacrificed to his newfound mission. His heart thrummed with a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. Today would mark a turning point. He had a plan to present his findings to a small group of colleagues, and the warm message from Miguel lingered in his thoughts like an unshakable anchor. As he brewed his morning coffee, John's mind roamed through potential scenarios. What reactions could he expect? Would these colleagues, each deeply entrenched in the corporate world, share his fire? Or would his initiative be met with skepticism? The echo of David's warnings loomed overhead like storm clouds, darkening the path ahead. Arriving at the office, he felt the familiar pulse of the corporate universe around him, abstract yet insistent. The hum of printers and the soft clatter of keyboards created a soundtrack that reminded him of the vast bureaucracy he planned to confront. Every face he passed in the hallway felt like a potential ally, or a hidden adversary. What if they weren't ready to challenge the status quo? With a steadying breath, he approached the small conference room where his colleagues were gathering. Each familiar face served as a reminder of what was at stake. As they settled into their chairs, John noticed their varied expressions: curiosity, boredom, wariness. He hesitated for a moment, reflecting on the gravity of the choices that led him to this point. Could he genuinely lead them into a storm of scrutiny? "Thank you all for coming," he began, forcing his voice to retain an even tone, despite the tide of emotions roiling within. He outlined the findings he had meticulously gathered, the public-facing statistics, emphasizing the integrity of their fund against the growing web of enclosed contracts benefiting only a select few. He watched as furrowed brows shifted into skeptical stares. "Are you suggesting that we shift our focus?" someone challenged, breaking the silence that hung heavily in the air. John's pulse quickened, but this was exactly the reaction he anticipated, a crucial moment for dialogue. "Yes," he replied, feeling a pool of courage swell within. "We can be advocates for change instead of silent participants. We owe it to our students, to the very essence of what we stand for." Several moments of silence hung in the air. He could see calculations happening behind glowing screens and furtive glances exchanged among his peers. Each second felt painfully stretched, yet the vulnerability of his position compelled him forward. Then came the pivotal questioning. But what if we expose ourselves to backlash? Wouldn't it be safer to maintain the current approach and improve from within? The thought struck him hard, igniting his determination and weaving through all the reasons he'd considered risking exposure. Safety shouldn't come at the cost of justice. We owe it to those whose voices are stifled. If we remain silent, we are as guilty as those perpetuating this cycle of exploitation. A palpable tension filled the room, as doubt merged with the possibility of unearthing the truth. An elderly colleague named Sarah, known for her cautious approach to change, leaned forward. "You know, John, sometimes the most transformative decisions come from uncomfortable territory. I'm not sure how far we could take this together, but..." John's heart raced. Her words, while tentative, felt like a tiny spark catching fire. Others began to murmur, reflecting the growing dissent against the status quo he'd hoped to inspire. "Let the discussion unfold," he encouraged, pivoting from his fear into purpose. Together they exchanged stories of misplaced trust and broken promises, and something shifted in the atmosphere. As the minutes slipped away, John felt a growing sense of empowerment, the air thick with shared resolve. But even amidst this budding coalition, doubt crept in. What awaited him outside these walls, where the real confrontation lay? Would the executives remain blind to the change that was emerging from below? Before he could dwell further on the uncertainties, a knock broke the flow, pulling everyone's attention toward the door. John's heart dropped as he recognized the imposing figure poised there, David, an embodiment of everything he was attempting to dismantle. The moment of truth was upon them, the battle lines becoming increasingly blurred. Would they stand firm, or falter under the weight of intimidation? John knew that, whether they were ready or not, the tide of change was about to surge. "Here comes the real test," he thought, adrenaline surging through his veins as the door swung open. David strode into the conference room, his presence commanding attention and suffocating the burgeoning atmosphere of camaraderie in an instant. John's mind raced. His adversary was here, not merely as an executive, but as the personification of doubt and fear. This was the man who had built a fortress around complacency, and who would resist any hint of vulnerability that John dared to expose. "John," David said, his gaze sweeping across the gathered team. "I trust this meeting is about our operational enhancements and not some reckless venture into personal agendas." The words dripped with condescension, yet they cloaked an undeniable challenge that John couldn't ignore. "Actually, David," John replied, clenching his fist beneath the table, "we're discussing the integrity of our program and the ethical implications of our current contracts." The response felt invigorating. Even as he faced an uphill battle, he could hear the faint echoes of support from colleagues stirring around him. David raised an eyebrow. The silence stretched taut, only to be punctured by Sarah's quiet voice. "We stand to lose more than we gain if we ignore the injustices we enable. Change may be uncomfortable, but sometimes we must confront the stakes." The tension crackled, igniting a flicker of hope within John. Sarah's endorsement granted him a powerful ally, but the weight of David's skepticism loomed over everything. Would it be enough? "Let's not conflate ethical debates with organizational efficacy," David interjected. "You're risking not just your standing, but the reputation of the whole team. Are you prepared for the consequences of this crusade?" The challenge hung in the air like a guillotine, threatening to sever John from any potential allies. But John's heart raced, and he felt a surge of indignation. "We can't afford to ignore our responsibility just because it might be inconvenient. If we don't embrace transparency, what legacy are we building?" His voice was louder now, vibrant with determination, quaking under the strain of unexpressed fears but unyielding nonetheless. A ripple of murmurs spread among his colleagues. "Is this what we truly want to uphold?" One voice finally spoke up. "Wouldn't it be worth it to advocate for those we serve?" John seized the moment, capitalizing on the pulse of support. As the dialogue intensified, John deftly navigated through the conversation, reinforcing his points with facts, anecdotes, and drawing connections between their goals and ethical integrity. For every objection David raised, John countered with data and the very human stories that birthed his initiative. Each rebuttal fortified the coalition that was quietly forming around him, transforming skepticism into solidarity. But within him, conflicting thoughts clashed. This was no longer just about his findings. It was an existential confrontation, a test of integrity that reached into his very identity. If David dismantled this budding coalition, would John's ambition become a mere whisper drowned by the ferocity of his opponent? He pondered the risk beyond the walls, outside the safety of discussions. If he failed here, would he have the courage to push back again? Suddenly, David's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "This cannot end well for any of you. Consider your next steps carefully, John. If this is about honor, are you prepared to sacrifice your future for an ideal?" The challenge, soaked in menace, froze John in time. He could feel the stirring uncertainty reaching for him. And yet, amidst the chaos of internal turmoil, a profound realization surfaced. This was not merely a fight for the organization's values. It was a life-defining moment for him as well. He wouldn't let fear script his story. Gathering his breath, John took one last look at his colleagues' faces, those who had begun to challenge the status quo and envision change. "This isn't just about me, David. It's about our shared commitment to integrity. If we stand together, we can transform this organization for the better." The floor quaked with the weight of decisions being forged, and John felt an electrifying resolve coalesce within. It was now or never. He would either summon enough courage to stand firm or watch his vision disintegrate before him. As the meeting swelled in intensity, he sensed his colleagues leaning toward a tipping point, but the formidable specter of David still loomed large. The power of truth against the shackles of fear hung in the balance. And just as momentum filled the room and the tide seemed to shift in John's favor, David's cutting gaze lingered at the door, a dark shadow threatening to snuff out the burgeoning light. "Let's see how far your courage extends when the truth becomes a public affair," he said, a smirk surfacing as he departed. The stakes had escalated. Now John faced not only the corporate hierarchy, but the possibility of exposing himself to the world outside the office, a place where past failures and current intentions collided fiercely. Would the fight for integrity push him into transformative territory, or force him back into silence? Instinctively, he knew a pivotal choice awaited. Change had begun in that room, but was he ready to follow it through? A chorus of resolve echoed around him, but the echo of David's threat rang louder still. The moment of truth lay ahead, and John understood with chilling clarity. Confrontation was not just with David, but with the very essence of his own ambitions and ethics. What lay beyond that door? Would confronting David be the final catalyst he needed, or the beginning of an unrecoverable descent? John stood on the precipice of change, caught in the aftershocks of David's ominous dismissal. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with the audacity of their collective resolve. He was no longer just a self-made millionaire. He had transformed into a leader of integrity, willing to dismantle the barriers of complacency for the sake of accountability. As he walked away from the conference room, John felt the weight of his decision pressing against him like a heavy coat. Confronting David wasn't merely an act of defiance. It was now a testament to the direction he wanted to chart moving forward. With Miguel's success and the scholarship fund hanging in the balance, he visualized the future he was crafting. A future built not on fear, but on principled action. He reached his desk and quickly jotted down the plans that began to crystallize in his mind. Each bullet point elevated his sense of purpose, serving as both a strategy and a declaration of intent. The plan would encompass transparency, partnerships with advocacy groups focused on reform, and an extensive review of the fund's structure, changes that did not just affect Miguel's future, but sought to provide opportunities for countless others. Later that day, he convened a gathering with colleagues who had expressed interest. The room filled with a blend of uncertainty and anticipation as he unveiled his comprehensive proposal. "Today, we reshape the narrative," he declared, his voice unwavering. "This isn't just about us as individuals. It's about building a legacy where ethics supersede profit, where our decisions pave the way for future leaders who deserve honesty and empowerment." The dialogue flourished, passionate sentiments intertwining with John's core vision. Each colleague who spoke out, be they cautious or fervent, added another layer of commitment to their shared mission. John felt an exhilarating surge as hope transformed into a tangible force that began to infuse the atmosphere with renewed vigor. The initial skepticism began to dissipate, replaced by shared purpose. Sarah stepped forward, urging everyone to consider the impact their actions could wield. "It's not merely about saving ourselves from repercussions. We have a greater responsibility," she added, her voice steady and resolute. "Let's take a stand together." The collective resolve solidified into a movement. John could feel the transformation unfolding, not just within him, but among his peers. They weren't just looking for a shift in strategies. They were forging new identities as advocates, modeling a standard that uplifted others instead of acquiescing to comfortable norms. As the meeting adjourned, John felt a profound firmness within him. This was more than professional achievement. It was fulfilling a personal calling, redemption not just for Maria and Miguel, but for every disheartened soul whose dreams had once seemed unattainable. Courage, he realized, doesn't just transform individuals. It has the power to reframe entire institutions. Weeks passed, and John initiated conversations with external organizations that specialized in educational reform. Every connection he made further anchored his commitment. As David's tactics grew increasingly desperate to maintain the status quo, John's network expanded beyond the walls of their office, drawing in allies from various sectors decrying systemic inequity. The day came when John finally gathered enough support to formally approach the board. Arcs of tension rippled through every meeting room. Conversations shifted. Allies stood by him, armed with evidence and a vision for a scholarship program rooted in transparency. "This is the moment," John stated passionately during one confrontation. "The moment to demand accountability." The tides began to turn. Miguel's scholarship, once a lifeline hidden in the shadows of uncertainty, emerged into the spotlight as a symbol of what honesty could achieve. Media outlets began to cover their story, garnering public support that placed pressure upon their formerly indifferent corporate hierarchy. And as the board convened to review their findings, he noticed a palpable shift in the room. Individuals who once harbored doubt now looked at him with respect, acknowledging the potential for real change. John could feel the earnest belief that echoed within him now radiate off his colleagues. The crescendo of their voices together became a force that could no longer be ignored. "John, it's hard to believe this all began with a simple conversation around the kitchen table," Maria noted one evening, as they celebrated finally securing long-term funding for the scholarship program. She beamed with pride, tears glistening in her eyes as she thought of Miguel's future. John smiled back at her, filled with satisfaction, a deep sense of fulfillment that stemmed from their journey, but also from an undeniable transformation within himself. This wasn't just about giving money, Maria. This was about rebuilding trust, about believing in the potential of every student aiming for greatness. He had conquered the doubts that initially haunted him, proving that success was not solely defined by wealth, but by the courage to advocate for others, an enduring impact measured not by dollars, but by lives transformed. John Caldwell held not just a title of millionaire, but that of a steward of hope, fostering resilience where challenges like his had once represented insurmountable walls. As day melted into night, he stood on the porch of the mansion that once felt isolating, now a vibrant hive of energy and purpose. Friends and family gathered to celebrate budding futures. In that moment, John realized he had crafted a legacy that would endure far beyond himself. Every step taken seemed to echo the essence of his journey, one marked by courage, resolution, and the metamorphosis into an advocate who embraced his power to effect change. The shadows had lifted, and standing before the horizon, he knew the future held a constellation of possibilities waiting to be discovered. And so he whispered to the night sky, grateful for every lesson learned and every challenge confronted, affirming that his journey was just beginning. Now is the crucial moment. You need to subscribe now to ensure you are updated with future exclusive emotional stories that inspire change. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and spread the impact of stories like John's transformation. Comment below your thoughts on this conclusion, the lessons drawn, or similar experiences you've had. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need this spark of inspiration. Let's grow together and uplift each other through personal overcoming stories. Don't wait even one more second. Your support matters.